Okay, so it's time. François here is going to talk about retro computing. I have to say I'm surprised there's so many people interested in this.
So am I.
Yeah, so I originally picked this talk because I'm very selfish and I'm interested in this myself. So I thought I will have someone talk about this. François here volunteered. And I hope you enjoy the talk. Thank you.
Yeah, this way. So, welcome. Yeah, well, I've never seen so many people at one of my talks. Usually I talk about haiku, the crowd is much smaller. But so yeah, I'm also into antiques. I've already given a talk about freeing your antiques at the Libre Software meeting 2 years ago. So I thought I would give it a different twist this year. So let's talk first about the really old boxes from the 80s. You know, I had an Auric Atmos. Most of you probably know about the C64 from Commodore and other stuff like Apple II and many others. So basically those were small boxes with an 8-bit CPU, either 6502 or Z80, or there were many at the time before Intel took the whole market. Most of them had much less than 64 kilobytes of RAM. That's not much. And usually you just had text display. If you were lucky, you could get some graphics, but like 200 by 200 or something like this. Some had a sound chip that could play some tunes. And most of those had a cassette tape for storage. So you had to play, type C load, blah, 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 and then go get 1, 2, 3 coffees, and maybe it didn't crash while loading your game. But some of them had expensive floppy drives, yeah, and some had serial ports, but not all of them, and most of them run the Microsoft Basic language in the ROM. But some guy wrote a nice operating system for the C64 that's called Kontiki. And he later, later people ported it to other architectures. And then he himself reused it for his PhD thesis as an operating system for the Internet of Things. So you see, it can get to interesting things. So it's based on proto-threads, which actually share a single stack for all the threads. It's quite interesting. And they even have an IPv4 and IPv6 stack that's certified by Cisco. So it's, whoa, nice. And a, quote, graphical interface that can even run as a VNC server. And it has a web browser, IRC, and it looks like this. If it does work, it might actually have I might actually be able to run it live. That's C64 emulator. Oh, oops, the window is here. I've activated the turbo mode here because it's a bit slow. But yeah, it kind of works. So it's loading quite a lot of stuff. There we go.
You disabled turbo.
Oh, did I?
Yes.
I think it's.
You have 100% speed.
Oh yeah, right. That's weird. Looks like this. So you can actually open menus and run the network configuration, and yeah. Well, I don't have the network setup, but there's a web browser, IRC client, and a lot of interesting, useless stuff. So that's for Contiki. I put an example, the sample code for the about box here. One page and second page. So you see process thread, blah blah blah, and then it's event based. So it switches the threads on when waiting for events. There are many operating systems for those old machines. Some of them are free and open source software. Others are more of, well, I don't really care, or the source code is here, but I don't care, whatever. Now let's talk about newer CPUs, like 1632-bit. There's, of course, the 68K with the whole family, Atari, Amiga, Mac, NEX, and all those. ARM. ARM was born by Acorn. They created the CPU for their own machine. First the Archimede, and then the RISC PC, and then many others, and the 8086 for the PC. Yeah, so those platforms were a bit better. Most had a mouse and graphics up to VGA or something. Sometimes 266 colors, sometimes better. Most sound, and usually floppy drives. And lucky people had a hard drive, and it was getting better for networking. Ethernet wasn't really a standard at the time. Of course, they run NetBSD, sorry, because NetBSD has been ported to most architectures, even toasters, I've heard. So yeah, you need an MMU, of course, and enough RAM, but you might be able to get an X server to run. GNU Linux used to support those machines long ago. Yeah, still does. Great. Debian stopped officially supporting them, but you can get some archives. There's RISC-OS, which isn't really free software. The source code has been published, but it's non-commercial license, so, well, kind of. But their application database is nice because it says if it's a shareware, freeware, and GPL v2, whatever, so you can actually search for apps that are free software. The Atari hardware, which, well, was quite nice. The Falcon had full 030 CPU, so you had an MMU you could run.
There is also 060 accelerator for Falcon.
Yeah, right, exactly. I didn't mention that. And some clones, and there's a new hardware called the Firebee, which is a cold fire CPU. So it's really nice. It's a small box, and an FPGA emulation, and there's RNIM, which you can run on your machine, your PC, which emulates kind of a clone, O40 clone. So there are free software operating systems for the Atari. There's EmuTOS, and there's Mint, which isn't the Linux Mint distro. Mint is not TOS, which is free software now. And it's preemptive multitasking. It has Unix-ish API and even a U drive, because it was like the DOS. There is A, B, C drive, and there's a U for Unix drive, which has /proc/ blah blah blah. So it's a bit weird, but it's funny. And maybe Haiku someday. I started a Haiku port, but well. And there are I've put up a lot of links. All the blue words are hyperlinks in the PDF, and so you can click them. Yeah, most authors for those platforms don't really care about free software. So sometimes they publish the source code, but they either don't care what people do, or they say, oh, just don't do commercial stuff. So it's not really free software. So maybe if you beg them, they might think, oh yeah, I could put a license on them. So just try and mail them, who knows. Some more links. Yeah, Amiga hardware. So maybe some of you weren't born at the time, but there was a huge war between Atari and Amiga, so, well, but they're friends now. So, yeah, I know both sides. So, the Amiga usually had a cheaper version of the CPUs, so you had to add an accelerator card to get an MMU and, well, GNU Linux or BSD. So, but there are still new hardware as well in the Amiga world. The new Vampire 2 accelerator, but it lacks an MMU.
And FPU.
And FPU, right? There's a Minimig, which is also an FPGA emulation.
You can also run on Mist.
Exactly. And there are a lot of forks of the emulator, UAE. So I didn't really put a link because I didn't know which one to put. And there are PPC machines, but, well, that's cheating. So AROS, it used to be Amiga Replacement Operating System. Now it's Amiga Research Operating System. So it's compatible with the original one, but it's free software. And it includes the full desktop.
There's also ARM port. I will not say that AROS is binary compatible.
Well, the goal of AROS was to be binary compatible, and yeah, they kind of slipped away from that. And yes, as I said, there's an ARM port as well. So I don't really have an UAE setup working right now.
Applications on Amiga nowadays more and more mention exact license. In past, I did Amiga programming in previous millennium. In past, many authors also included license.
Yeah, I just had a look at Aminet, and the directory listing doesn't mention the license, but there are readmes which actually, yes, mention the license.
Huge.
Yeah.
For years, it was the biggest software collection.
So I don't have UAE working, it's just crashing today, I don't know why. But that's Aranim, so it's the Atari emulator with the basic desktop from Mint. So, well, it's not really customized, it can look a lot nicer than that. But yeah. And this morning I saw a tweet from someone saying, oh, the assembler source code has been published for this, so I'd figure I'd put it here. Some more references. I probably forgot some links, but yeah. So wait, what about the PC? Well, now there is still free DOS. People are still working on a DOS operating system for the PC. That's weird. And GAM has been open source some time ago, so you can actually run a GEM desktop. 386 BSD, which the last published version was 0.1 or something until very recently. And then the latest one has been published as with the source code. So yeah, it's nice. I've seen it in Capital du Libre some months ago. And then there's Calmira 2, which is actually a shell for Windows 3. So yeah, it's weird. I think there's even Calmira Vista or something. People are crazy. And then there's Multidesk OS. It's a universal operating system that runs everywhere. And okay, that's just a troll, but I had to mention it. There are many funny libraries around that could be used to port software to those platforms. Like for games, there are Allegro, SDL. Well, the 1.2 SDL, because the 2.0 actually has been rewritten from scratch, so they ditched all the antique stuff. So it's just Win, Android, and macOS. So well, and yeah, and Unix with X11. So people know about N curses on Linux, but there's also PD curses, which has been ported to many other platforms, including SDL. So if you have SDL, you can actually run curses applications as well. There are other stuff like Portly, but I couldn't find a license, so I'll probably mail them to see if they can put a proper license on it. Native file dialog is useful with SDL apps, so you can actually have the single window SDL apps, but at least you have native file requesters, so it's a bit more native. And yeah, some interesting apps like QEmax, written by Fabrice Bellard, so you probably know about QEMU, FFmpeg, and other weird stuff like this. Well, it's this guy. He's a crazy guy. Yeah, Rhapsody IRC is a bit simpler than IRC to port. And yeah, OCP to have some music. And then there's the browser. We need internet access and we need a web browser. There's NetSurf, which started as a browser for the RISC PC and RISC OS. And it works with 16 megabytes of RAM. And since then it has been ported to GNU Linux, so you can use GTK or the frame buffer for embedded devices. I ported it to Haiku. It's been ported to Atari, Mint, and Amiga OS, so also ours, and other mostly proprietary platforms, and React OS because it's been ported to Windows. So, so yeah, it supports HTML5 and CSS. Well, most of CSS. And someday JavaScript should work. Sorry. And then those nice guys from NetSurf, they also maintain a toolchain across GCC with all the libs that are required for NetSurf. So basically you just install their toolchain and you can actually start porting applications to those platforms. So it's really, really useful. Oh, well, I was fast. So thanks for watching. So you might get more infos in my previous talk at RMLL. Yeah, thanks, and time for questions. Question? Yep.
Have you tried porting stuff to any of the sort of legacy .6.8K processors later ARM of course there's that for you too.
So the question was, have you tried porting any of these to handheld devices like Palm? Actually, I do have an HP iPac, not iPad, iPac, the small Windows CE device, but I've passed by some toolchain stuff, but it wasn't really maintained. I think there are ports like VLC had been ported to those, but it's not really maintained either. There's stuff like PUTTY, so the SSH client, but I'm not sure it's really maintained either for Windows CE. I didn't really look into Palm stuff, but yeah, please have a look.
When it comes to Palm devices, if you ignore the non-ARM ones, you can run Linux, some version of Linux usually, because it was developed. Linux for Palm ARM devices was developed when they were kind of still not so old ones. I don't know how it is with mainline, so you are probably stuck with something like 2.6 kernels. For Windows CE devices, for many of them, there were also Linux ports at missed levels of usefulness.
Yes.
For Motorola-based Palms, which means everything not running Palm OS 5, you just stay with Palm OS.
So to sum up, for the Palm devices, the ARM devices from Palm, you can run Linux, and for the 68K ones, well, just stick to Palm OS. And for Windows CE, I recall seeing Linux ports to those as well. Yeah.
You had Familiar for iPads. There were sharp-made Zauruses, and we had OpenZaurus for it.
Yeah, I noticed on the NetBSD ports pages, the Zorus port is still mentioned. Yeah.
Any chance to flash any of those on older BlackBerry devices?
What? Sorry?
Any chance to flash some of that software on older BlackBerry devices?
Oh, BlackBerry. Well, I didn't really works with BlackBerry, so I can't really say what you can do with BlackBerry. Sorry. Yeah.
Also a porting question. Have you tried porting it to cartridge-based systems, where you put in a cartridge and it gives you additional RAM or storage to run those OSs? Because I think if you run a browser, you start having a lot of tabs. Well, we all know that tabs take up RAM. I think that these cartridges would actually benefit. The browser would benefit from the cartridges, of course.
Well, you mean for?
I think I'm stuck in consoles, aren't I?
Yeah. Some people actually. So, question was, did you try to port these things using cartridges on devices? Well, it's mostly consoles and Atari ST or maybe on the Atari Amiga. You usually you have an accelerator board with a lot of RAM, so it's not really that much of a concern because the Falcon was like 14 mags of RAM, so it's a bit small. But for the consoles, actually, I didn't really look into it because I'm not really a gamer myself. I think I've seen several stuff for the consoles, so you probably can find it as well.
And usually those hardware which used cartridge as a main storage was slow enough for most people to not consider porting anything to it.
So the cartridges, usually are banked memories. You had to switch banks, and
it was just memory, and some you could take over the whole machine.
Yeah, but usually it was a bit slower, depending on the cartridge. Some were actually replacing the CPU, and
that depends on machine.
Like SymBOS, which I mentioned, which is an operating system for the Z80 machines, like Amstrad. So basically, it works much better with an add-in card, which actually replaces the CPU, and so yeah. Yep.
Have you ported X2I question, but you were demonstrating the Commodore 64 OS. It had a web browser and an IRC client. But how do you get network connections to Commodore? Because I don't believe it has the network, does it?
So the question was, you mentioned, Kentucky and web browser, RC client. There's an email client as well. So how do you connect them to the internet on them? Well, you can use, I mentioned, serial ports. So you can run SLIP or maybe even PPP, but I'm not sure.
SLIP is not. If you have 2200 on report.
Yeah, SLIP is way enough. You don't need to log in with a password and whatever.
There's also cartridge with Ethernet.
And yes, there are also cartridges with an Ethernet chip, and it's actually some of them actually have their own IP stack on them, so you can actually just send them the.
Be able to run a Commodore 64 network standalone without a computer that intervenes and makes IP into serial, etc.
There was a modem back then. I don't know if that maybe.
Well.
Modem for the actual big modem for the Commodore 64. Maybe that's enough. To
Yes, you
call regular dial-up. I don't know if they exist anymore.
Yes, you can actually use a modem, which basically is just a device over a serial line. So, yeah, and there used to be a C64 web server running Kentucky. It probably still runs. So you can actually access web pages served from a C64 machine.
There is a cartridge with a SD card and also an expansion for Ethernet. It's called RRNet. And without you can actually have a CD64 standard.
So yes, there's an extension cartridge with SD card slot and Ethernet card. There are also, I didn't mention because I was talking desktop, but there are floppy disk emulators that you just plug to replace the physical floppy drive, and you can just put an SD card in, so you can actually have plenty of software on them. Yes? Yeah.
I'd like to say that I've actually ported Riscos
Sorry?
on top of Linux.
Sorry?
As I took my course, I ported Riscos to actually run on top of Linux. I'm running on my.
I didn't, sorry.
I've managed to port Riscos to run on top of Linux.
Oh yeah, you ported RISC-OS on top of Linux.
Yes.
Ah, that's interesting.
I think.
I need to see this. Yeah, thank you. A question? Yeah, here. Yeah.
Have you taken a look at some of the actual hardware replacement projects to replace the actual computers with modern old computers, like the Firebee or the Ataris?
Yeah, I have a friend which does have a Firebee, so it's really nice. It's a.
Did you bring it here?
Sorry?
Did you bring it here?
No, unfortunately, yeah, I didn't. Yeah, but it's small. It's funny. It has an internal battery, so you can actually just unplug it and it can still run for an hour or so. So yeah, maybe one more question. Well, thank you.
You didn't mention the Apple II. Any free and open source operating systems or something like that that have been ported to Apple II? Not ported, but free software that can run on the Apple II.
So I didn't mention Apple II. Contigi has been ported to Apple II.
Yeah.
I think I've seen what was it called, GEOS or something.
Yes.
I'm not sure it's free software.
No, it's
No, it's not. It's,
GEOS,
yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much.